أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another Reverts reality episode. This is number 24, mashallah, tabarakallah. Can't believe how time is flying for us here. So we're going to get right into it because we're a few minutes late. We were having some technical difficulties. Anyway, I'm here with my co-host, Sister Orenda, Dadkhah, and two very special guests. Sister Jackie from the Pennsylvania, she's the lead, mashallah, and a very special guest, an old friend and brother in Islam, convert, you name it, Dr. Ray, mashallah, from New Jersey. So we have East Coast and Central. So Sister Jackie's in Pennsylvania as well. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So today's topic is another very, very important topic. And we titled it, Do You Know the Difference? And what we are talking about specifically is boundaries. What are boundaries? That's my first question. And so I came across a little article, and we have Dr. Ray here who's going to, inshallah, start us on this conversation. But boundaries are very important to set in all relationships. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Ray?
Absolutely.
And so when it comes to our convert community, subhanAllah, we're so vulnerable. We come from different walks of life. And so it's very difficult sometimes to even identify or be able to set these boundaries because we're so new in this new way of life. And so can you give us some a definition or what we should be looking for when we say, boundaries? What are boundaries, inshallah?
I think that when you أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله على نبينا وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. First, Jacquelyn for you all inviting me, especially to Nahela. I really appreciate you reaching out. So first, when you talk about what is boundaries, I think boundaries relates specifically interpersonally, right? Like how you would prefer in a healthy way to relate to other people, and how you would prefer in a healthy way for other people to be able to relate to you, right? That's the kind of the simplest definition that you can give. How do you want to be treated, and how do you prefer to treat other people, and everything in between that comes along with that. I think there's a lot of, to expand on it. I think one of the main things that I want to talk about, especially for us as Muslims and especially us as convert Muslims, think that we come from a society where there's where we're very polite, and sometimes that politeness gets mixed in with the expectation of righteousness, and that confuses us when it relates to setting firm boundaries with people, because it feels like we're being impolite or we're not being righteous. Right? When it's really, we have a right to be respected in a certain way and treated with a certain amount of respect. But these issues are kind of conflated with each other, where we allow people to overstep boundaries that otherwise in other social situations nobody would overstep.
Right. So how can we as a community or as new converts, how can we, the sunnah is very clear, and there is a specific hadith where the Prophet ﷺ tells us very clearly that whatever you want for yourself, you want for your brother. And so, that really encompasses, I would say, almost everything, right? If you want to be treated with this respect that you're talking about, if you want to be involved, if you want to be, as far as our dignity is concerned, as far as the way, we are invited into different spaces. I know it's difficult a lot of times, and we're going to be talking about relationships because we get, I think that's the number one, topic that we get, right, Sister Orenda? Anytime it comes to relationships and marriage, and so Sister Jackie and I and all of us have, mashallah, alhamdulillah, we have a lot of experience when it comes to that. And so, you know, the way we protect ourselves, right? That's like one way of setting boundaries. We need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves in the beginning to be able to live a healthy journey as we are embarking on this new way of life. And so my next question to any of you would be, how can we identify when people are crossing these boundaries, whether it's at the masjid, whether it's in a sister-to-sister relationship, whether it's in a marriage? I mean, there's so many boundaries that need to be set early on. And because you said we're so polite, you know, it's please and thank you, and it's so hard to lower our gaze because we're taught to look into the eyes, you know, as we're growing up. It's like, look at me in the eyes when I'm talking to you. But the Quran says to lower my gaze. So it's like, so it changes overnight, right? That dynamic just changes. So Jackie, how difficult was it for you upon embracing Islam to set some of these boundaries, whether it was at work, whether it was, you know, in a relationship, or even with sisters?
So I think, thank you, Sister Nahela. I think that's an excellent question, but I think we need to maybe take it a step a little bit back, because before we can identify when we can, when and how we set healthy boundaries, I think it's important to recognize that we as converts don't always come into the religion with the ability to do that, because we come from different backgrounds. So for example, this has been something extremely difficult for me all my life, because as a child, I grew up as, you know, a child of an alcoholic, right? So I come in with all of these special issues before Islam was able to touch my life. And that causes you to be stunted in certain areas. And one of those areas is setting boundaries. So, you know, I was always a people pleaser, always saying yes, always going above and beyond. And it took a lot for me to realize that I'm a lot more than what I can give to other people, right? And so I think that a lot of reverts and converts come into the religion, and first, it's so important to evaluate ourselves and build those skills in order to set the healthy boundaries, you know, first. And one of those skills is building our inner voice, because a lot of times our inner voices get stunted, and there might be something inside of you saying, I'm uncomfortable right now, or I don't want to do this, or this isn't something that is alignment with my values, but it gets stunted because of past issues or traumas and what you've gone through, you know, prior to coming into Islam.
Mashallah. Dr. Ray?
I think that's a very good point. First and foremost, and I really do appreciate that, because we are coming into Islam as our own selves, the good and the bad of it, whatever we fixed and whatever we have yet to fix. And that is very much an important thing. And I think coupled along with that is something that, you know, in counseling, we call it the one down position, right? And the one down position means that in terms of like the hierarchy and an interpersonal relationship, you're one step below or behind the person who might be in charge of the dynamic, right? And so, for instance, when I accepted Islam and I came to the masjid, I sat in the classes with everybody, the Arabic class, the Quran recitation class, Tawheed and Fiqh, and I sat in those classes. I was entering into a system where everybody already knew each other, right? And everybody knew the culture, not in terms of cultural Islam, but the culture of how Islam is practiced. And so I was very much one down. I was still figuring out who I was in this new social system. And at that time, your energy is kind of diverted, right? Because your time and your attention is focused on building up this new self. And it's very fragile and it's very insecure. Not saying insecure like I'm not secure about who I am as a person, but it's not as defined as somebody who's been living in this community for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, born into it, right? And so in those instances, when you're talking about boundaries, that's another important point too, is that number one, there's probably a lot going on around you, and boundaries is probably going to be relatively low on the totem pole. I'm trying to figure out how to pray, and then somebody's asking me my convert story. What do I, like, I'm just here for, right? Like, and so you're yes, and so you spend a lot of time, I think, frazzled, right, in the beginning, and because I think that you're trying to get a sense of who you are in this new space, in this new lifestyle that you've chosen for yourself, this new religion that you've chosen for yourself. And so a lot of that early work, I think, in terms of understanding boundaries is focusing on defining who you are now that you have made this new decision in your life, and starting to make that feel more secure. And it's not based on knowledge. It's not about how much you know about the religion or how much you're practicing in a religion, but really starting to feel a little bit more self-assured and defined, because you can't protect the boundary that you haven't drawn yet, right, in a lot of ways. And so yes, you're coming in to the community with a lot of your own struggles with boundaries, but then also taking on this new religious perspective in your life, is a way to put it. I don't want to say new identity, right, but it is very much a new identity. um, you're adding to who you are as a person religiously, I guess is the best way to put it. And so until you have that really figured out, it can be very hard to draw some boundaries. And so what can be very easy to say to people is, I'm not ready to talk about that yet. um, and owning your religious journey, right? I know for myself, and I apologize if I'm belaboring this, but I'm just trying to draw on my own experiences, right? I remember um, when I was new in Islam, I would get a lot of, so I had a lot of people who were very supportive, but then I had people who would say things that I felt like were inconsiderate, right? That didn't really respect where I was in the religion, right? I remember somebody, I think I was Muslim for like a month or 2 months, and somebody was like, "Oh, you don't have a beard," and I'm like, "I don't even know how to pray. So what are you talking about, right?" Like, and but being having the wherewithal in those moments to say to people like, "Listen, you need to respect my growth in the religion," right? To be able to be strong enough to say that, because I think that when we're looking at people who come before us in the religion, especially when we're early in practicing Islam, we tend to be very deferential to them, at least from what I've seen and from even my own experience. You don't want to say or do anything to disrespect somebody, but at the same time, you know that you're not being treated like with the etiquette that you know that you should be treated. But then you look at this person. I don't want to disrespect somebody who I feel like is a righteous person, or is an older brother in the community, or what have you. And that's what I meant about some of the politeness too, is that I think in our socially we're very deferential, right? Even though we can be harsh and nasty, I think in general, we bring that into our social circles. And it doesn't, I think we're kind of looking at it as a zero or one or all or nothing. I have to either be polite or have to be really harsh and nasty. And in between that is just firm. And remembering that firmness, I can be firm with people without hurting them or disrespecting them or insulting them or allowing them to, um, you know, run right over me. Listen, the beard is the next step in my journey, right? Like, or whatever the issue is that might be coming up, or even your knowledge in a religion or your outward religiosity, is just to sometimes say to people, listen, my journey is mine and yours is yours, right? You can advise me, and I appreciate advising me, but what you're doing now doesn't feel like advice. It feels like criticism, right? Give it back to the person, right? Give it back. You don't need to hold whatever it is that they're trying to give to you. Give it back. Now, or even to say to them, knowing that I'm new in the religion, what makes you say what you're saying to me the way you're saying it, right? Like, again, it's about giving it back, because that automatically teaches the person how to treat you. There's a boundary here. There's only so much um, that I can say and do with this person, or they're letting it be known very early that they expect to be treated a certain way. And I'm going to need to learn to conform with that, and for us not to be shy about that, right? It's not being immodest or failing to be righteous to let someone say things or treat you a way that makes you feel disrespected or uncomfortable.
So, mashallah, you touched on so many things, and so
Sorry.
no, and it's wonderful because I think a lot of us can relate on. I mean, you're talking, and I'm like, yeah, how many times do I have to see my story? And like, is that all that's interesting? You know, I've been Muslim this long. You still want to know my story? Like, can you go online and look for it? But like, even those boundaries, they seem like, you know, very minute. But, you know, I've mentioned this in the past. Sometimes we don't want to be remembering the past all the time, right? And so, like you said, give it back. For someone that is an introvert, it may be very difficult to be able to give it back or to even step out, you know, to be able to not even give it, just stand up for themselves. So I know, like you said, you know, and all of you can chime in, but I remember when I came in, I mean, I was very rigid. You know, I don't come from the streets. I don't come from gangs. Just because I'm Latina, I don't come from that lifestyle. So, but I was very firm in terms of, you know, what were my boundaries. But along the way, I got hurt more than once, you know, especially when I was being corrected in public instead of private. You know, the etiquettes were not being applied. And so to give that back now, obviously, now that we know a little bit more and our knowledge is a little bit more extensive, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Can we talk about this in a private setting? Or are you, like you said, are you criticizing or are you really giving me advice, right? And so to be able to do that, Jackie, are you an introvert, extrovert? How difficult? Sister Orenda, I know you're kind of both. I mean, I don't see Sister Orenda as an introvert, but I know in our conversations, she's told me she is. How difficult has it been for you ladies? And then I'll go back to you, Brother Ray, as far as, you know, being able to speak up for yourself in this community where you're kind of the sore thumb.
Well, I'm going to go first really quick, if you don't mind. I think coming into the faith, you're so, like Dr. Ray said, you're so overwhelmed with all the information and you're trying to learn and all that. And I think a lot of the times we also feel that sense of kind of being out there in space because we don't quite fit in with the you know, group of people maybe we were around or our families in this transition time. And also in the community, because you're just really new learning. And so a lot of the times we feel uncomfortable to say no, because we don't want to be rejected or abandoned by the people that we're coming into. And so you kind of have that sense of, your self-confidence isn't really high at the beginning because you're new, you don't know everything. And so it takes some time to learn that, but to understand that, you know, you need to make sure you are being true to yourself. And like Dr. Ray said, to kind of have a little bit of an understanding of yourself. And as Sister Jackie also mentioned, that inner voice kind of plays with you a lot, right? It's going to, I mean, I know it's played with me a lot over the years until recently, you know, it's been decades since I've embraced Islam, and it's a journey the whole time. And I believe it will be a journey until I pass on to the next life. And so it's all about just trying to learn and learn about yourself and what your boundaries are, what you're comfortable with. If you hear that inner voice telling you somebody's in your space or somebody's saying something that makes you uncomfortable, to understand that it's okay to let them know that or to say no. And so I think that was really hard for me in the beginning, up until recently, honestly. To be able to say that, because as Sister Jackie mentioned, you know, some of the childhood experiences you go through, you don't recognize it until later. Maybe you do some self-exploration, but it really does affect the way you interact with people and to be a people pleaser. And so sometimes if you're trying to be a people pleaser, you're going to step on your own boundaries. You're going to let those boundaries down and it affects you in a negative way. You know, it creates a lot of resentment, anger, disappointment. And so that's not anything we all want to feel. And so it's really good to to really self-explore, just as Dr. Ray had said, to kind of get a better grounding of yourself as you're on this journey.
Yeah, so I consider myself a functioning introvert. I need a couple days to myself, you know, to be with myself, and I don't necessarily crave, you know, social things all the time, but I do succeed well and in those settings. So that's, you know, one thing. But because of that, and because of like I studied sociology and anthropology, there was a few things I knew going into Islam that I used as, you know, tools to protect myself. So one thing I knew, and I learned this early on in life, you know, growing up, is that people don't always practice what they preach or, you know, what they believe. So I knew that going in, and also I knew the dynamics, you know, specifically in Philadelphia, all the different masjids here and different ideologies that I needed to protect my Islam. So that first year of converting, I was pretty self-isolated. I was looking at different masjids, but I didn't pick one yet because I knew how delicate I was, and I knew I was in transition, right? So I did not make a lot of friends. I just kind of like stood back and kept trying to learn the best that I could without the influence of people, because I could see the dynamics going on around me until I found something that was comfortable. And also, I knew how difficult it was for my non-Muslim friends and family to deal with my transition. So I felt that first year that I needed to protect my Islam. I had this like urge to protect my Islam and myself, because then you get these questions, and you kind of touched on it, Dr. Ray. I felt like I was going through an identity crisis, because before I was Jackie, and now I'm Jackie with Islam. And what does that mean? You know, what does that mean to me? And everybody's asking me, you know, all these questions, and I don't know yet, right? Like I'm still figuring it out. Like give me a minute. So I really did do a lot of introspection, and I stepped back from people. And some of that was good for me, and some of it was a little harmful for my relationships, because they, you know, felt like they weren't involved and they didn't know what was going on with me. And, you know, they couldn't understand that I was still figuring it out, and I didn't have the vocabulary at the time to tell them what was going on, because this is such a it's an interesting thing that you've never gone through in your entire life. So, you know, one of the tools maybe is to kind of explain, like a good way of explaining to people that you're in transition right now and you need the space to figure yourself out. That you'd love to tell them everything, you know, that's going on, and you'd love to implement all the practices right away. But, you know, be kind to me, because I'm in transition right now and I need to figure this out for myself. And so it sticks. Otherwise, I'm just going to be following what everyone else says and what everyone else is, you know, concerned about, and I won't be living like my true, authentic self, because I didn't figure it out for me. That is something I guess I would give myself advice, if I could give myself advice, be able to explain that transition period better to the people around me probably would have helped me a lot in that, you know, first year after converting.
So Dr. Ray, you know, we kind of touched a little bit about a lot and everything, but I want to go back a little bit more towards the psychological aspect of it, as far as, you know, I think all of you touched that we come from different walks of life and we're different individuals. It's difficult to be separated once you're given a title of a revert or a convert. Would you agree? Like all of a sudden you're put in this basket and we're all the same.
Yes.
But we're not. Can you touch a little bit about that? Because I'm sure like even our community, our born Muslims, our community in general will be listening to this. And so from a psychological aspect or point of view, like, can we, like Jackie said, can we be kinder to our reverts? We're not all in one basket. We don't all come from the same, walk of life, or I hope I'm getting my question across. But basically, sometimes I just want to scream and say, listen, we're different. And, your upbringing, mashallah, you come from a mom and dad. I come from a dysfunctional family. I met my dad when I was 18. It's like all of that plays such a huge role, especially in our convert community.
Yes. Okay. So, I do agree that there are a lot of differences, but there's also a lot of similarities. I think that the first thing that I feel inclined to say is that we should be getting to know each other, right? And especially trying to do that without preconceived notions, right? Whether for good or whether for bad, because I do think there's a lot of voyeurism. I want to know all about you as a convert to Islam. But I'm also going to disregard whatever you say about the religion, right? Like there's almost this, like I value you because you came into the religion, but I don't value any of the opinions that you have as someone who's embraced the religion. And so I think that there's a lot of that goes on. And of course, obviously it's misplaced. We're people who have chosen this religion for ourselves. And so by and large, you find a lot of people who are adults who are committed to learning about the religion. We probably tend to have a fair amount of like book knowledge about the religion because we accepted Islam, right? And somebody gave us 1,000 books to read. But I think interpersonally too, what I think that we need to be doing is learning from each other more than anything else, and using each other as resources. And the example that I've been giving people a lot lately is I have the benefit of having lived the life where I wasn't Muslim and then bringing that into Islam. And so now what I find myself doing is helping parents who are maybe first generation, second generation immigrants whose children have grown up, in street like society, right? And they're caught up in the drug game. They're caught up in gangs. They're not going to school. They're getting into trouble. And that was the life that I lived before Islam. So I can relate to your child in a way that you can't, and try to help them and guide them right. And also you as a parent, try to help you understand what your child is struggling with, right? But for my own self, still, I've never had to raise a Muslim child, right? And that's where the people in the community who were born into Islam, have raised Muslim children, benefit me, right? I don't know how to talk to my children about not dating and boys and girls and all. That's not the life that I live, and that's actually not how I was raised, right? My mother didn't have a conversation with me about, dating and girls. She just came into my room with me and my brother with a box of condoms, and she was just like, don't make any mistakes. And like, that was the conversation, right? Like, I wasn't being told to avoid anything except really having children. And obviously that's not the same parenting I can raise. Now, my mother, alhamdulillah, she was a good mother, but she had different values, and that wasn't one of her values. But now that's one of my values. And how do I teach a child to abstain from something that was never a thing when I was growing up? And so I think that kind of looking at each other for the value that we bring to the communities that we're all in is important, and not discounting anything that either one of us brings to the table, because I think that sometimes it builds this. There's a lot of unspoken resentment. I don't know how much y'all really talk about that, but there's a lot of resentment between converts and people who are born into Islam. There's resentment between people who are more religious and people who are less religious. I mean, women who cover and women who don't, men with beards and men who don't. We have all of this animosity towards each other, and we're kind of broken off into these little groups, as opposed to trying to benefit from each other, learn each other's stories. Not to entertain ourselves, but so that we can integrate each other into the community. Who does what best? Who brings what life experience to the table that we all as a community can benefit from? I think that when you take that outlook, we tend to have a better interpersonal, like relationship interactions with each other, more deep and meaningful relationships, as opposed to a lot of what we have, which is hundreds of people come to the masjid, we see them for 10 years, and we never know their names.
Mm.
Right?
Oh my God, you're so on the money right now. SubhanAllah. This whole resentment stuff, and yes, and we continue to see it in our communities. And SubhanAllah, as you were speaking, there was one sister that actually took off the hijab.
Mm.
And it hurt me because, I know her from her shahada and I know her, what have you, but, it's her journey, and
Yeah.
I'm still friends with her. I still, I'm still her sister in Islam and what have you. And then she became very resentful and very about animosity, and she made a video. She's like, why is it okay for the Daisy not to wear a hijab, but I'm a convert and I'm less of a Muslim? So the resentment started to be built, and she took her wrong trying to justify, perhaps, because it is bugged at the end of the day, right? And we understand that whatever Allah commands, it's your journey, but it's still a command from Allah. And whenever that journey to that's on your own. And so I've seen a lot of that resentment within our convert community. Can you touch on that?
I think that we're still human beings with one another. And I think that Islam came to make us dutiful to Allah. And part of being dutiful to Allah is to be better to our brothers and sisters in Islam. And so, I don't know if I'm going to address this issue as plainly. I'm sorry if kind of scoot me back if I drift too much. But I think that when you talk about, especially with people who are practicing Islam and then they start to drift out of practicing, it's sometimes just to check with them, to say, I noticed that you're not wearing the hijab. I noticed that you don't come to the masjid. I noticed you're not praying with us. Is everything okay? Instead of, I think sometimes, again, that politeness, we don't want to say anything, right? Like, I don't want to say, Nahela, are you there? You're frozen.
Yeah.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, very good. I think that sometimes we try to be polite and because we mistake being concerned with being nosy, right? I don't want to ask because what if they think I'm prying, or what if they think I just want to know their business? And some of that is warranted because there's a lot of nosy people who gave worrying about people or being concerned for somebody's well-being a bad name, right? Where you're worried that I'm going to use that information against you. And so sometimes just checking in with each other to say, look, I'm your brother in Islam, I'm your sister in Islam, and I care about you and I want to know how you're doing. And I see that you're taking off the hijab, and knowing that it's something that Allah has commanded us to do, I started to wonder to myself, there must be something big going on in your life if you've decided to take it off. Right? And I'm here for you, whatever is going on. If you feel like you can open up to me about that, or even if I could just point you to a person that you feel like you can open up to, even if it's not me, I want to do that, because I think that a lot of times some of these resentments comes, number one, because we've been validly mistreated. That's one thing. But then also a lot of it is projection. I think a lot of the resentment that we see in our communities is really projection. When I look at you, I see something, I'm reminded about something within myself that I don't like, or that I'm dissatisfied with. And so the best way for me to cope with that isn't to build it up and strengthen it or to work through it, it's to tear you down for having it. And I think that the best way to overcome that is so if you see me a certain way, right? I had a woman once say to me, this is when I was at NYU and I was doing counseling there, and I was working with a sister, and she said, you're nothing like how I thought you were going to be, right? She said, we, as in like the people of the Islamic Center at NYU, so we see you as this like really religious, strict person, and that you're like really, rigid and all of that kind of stuff. And, talking to you over these weeks, you helping me with, you know, what my concern is. I can see that you're not like that. You're not like what we thought you were, right? And that only came from her sitting with me, spending time with me, listening to how I'm reacting to what she's sharing with me, the good and the bad of it, and all of those things. And so when you spend time with someone, you're going to dispel a lot of the notions that they have about you, if you're willing to actually like relate to each other on a real level. And so when you talk about like removing a lot of these resentments, it's sitting and talking to each other. You know, I had a conversation once with a woman, and then I'll stop. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but I had a conversation with a young student once. I was invited to give a lecture, and this is like in my early days in Islam. So I was like really super strict and really judgmental. I think that I was being taught Islam, but I was being taught Islam in a way that was very judgmental. And I didn't, alhamdulillah for my life experiences and being exposed to all kinds of Muslims, because it really did help soften me towards the people. And so I was having a conversation with, after a lecture with this young student, and she didn't wear hijab, right? But she came to me and was like, you know, I have a question. I said, okay, what's your question? And she said, you know, there was a young man who he wants to shake my hand. He wants to give me hugs. He's a student, da da da. You know, he's trying to like be friends with me, but he's doing it in a way that, you know, crosses a lot of Islamic boundaries between men and women. And she was like, you know, how do I handle that? And she talked about like displeasing Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'm looking at her and I'm thinking to myself, a lot of what I'm being taught about how people practice Islam is unraveling, right? Meaning, here's a woman who doesn't wear hijab, that I have been taught are people who care less for their religion. This is a woman who is deeply concerned with Allah and does care about her Lord, and knows the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is she wearing hijab? No, that's her struggle, and I'm not dismissing her struggle. But it's not to say that those two things can exist with each other. And then you start to learn to let go of a lot of the notions that we have about each other, because they're usually driven by something unhealthy coming from the person who created it in the first place, right? Or whatever the social mechanism is that sustains it, right? And so I hope I'm making sense here, right? I apologize.
No, you are.
So, I mean, I think that when you talk about removing the resentments, a lot of it is like, how do we do that with the people who are racist, right? Like, you spend time with them. You don't always sit them down in a classroom and teach them a whole bunch of book knowledge. You invite them for dinner, and they get to see everybody's humanity, right? And this is the same thing. Like, how do we celebrate it when we bring non-Muslims into the masjid? We show them this is where we pray, this is what we do, and then everybody's amazed and we're so happy, and they let go of their notions. And it's the same thing for us as Muslims with each other. Spend time with each other. And it's not to say that when we're doing wrong, it's not wrong. When we're doing wrong, it's wrong, right? But you got to also understand where people are coming from. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was so patient with the people, and he was patient with their struggles, and he was patient with their journeys. And a lot of faults were brought to him of the people, and we need to study how he responded to that and how he wasn't critical. I'll give you an example, and then I'll stop, inshallah. So this is the story of the man who committed zina. And of course, he begged the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, to be purified, meaning he had to be punished for his sin. And so ultimately, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he very begrudgingly punished the man, right? It wasn't his first inclination to punish the man. His first inclination was to push the man away, right? Like, I don't want to hear whatever you bring it to me. I don't even want to hear it, right? Like, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't rush to hear people's faults. He actually tried to push them away, like, just take care of whatever your situation is. And the man insisted that he be heard. And so, of course, this man, he was married, he committed zina. The punishment for that was that he had to be stoned. And so he was killed. And the people were very, very upset with this man's sin, to the degree that there was a group of men who were cursing this person, right? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he overheard them, and he said, "Do not help." Sorry, this is the adhan, and the kids will do the adhan. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he heard them, and he said, "Do not help Shaitan against your brother, right? He is in need of Allah's mercy. Make dua for him." Right? This is what we're saying. And he never said committing zina was okay. He never said the man shouldn't have been punished. No, rather he still wanted to have mercy and make dua on the person who he even had to punish himself. And if we can find ourselves to have that much sensitivity and care and softness in our hearts toward each other for our mistakes and our wrongdoings and all of that other kind of stuff, and be patient with each other, you'll find that we're doing so much better with each other as a community, right? Converts and people who are born into Islam.
Yeah, mashallah, subhanallah. I mean, that's so beautiful. And subhanallah, I can't believe how quick this hour went. I mean, we started a few minutes late. So, but one of the things I do want to touch, these last few minutes, inshallah, and I have this little flyer that I came across, and it gives us some examples of how boundaries should sound like, right? And so, number one, it says, oftentimes we're at a place and we don't know how to detach ourselves or say, okay, I gotta go. So one of the ways that this little article said was, I can stay half an hour and make sure that the boundary is set from the beginning, right? To not feel guilty. And then there's another one that says, I don't respond to work emails on the weekend. So set your expectations so those boundaries, are set from the get-go, right? So people don't expect you to answer within 2 hours. Another one was, I need time to think about it, and I'll come back to that, similar to what Sister Jackie was saying. So just, I guess all of us can kind of chime in and share, like, what is some advice when it comes to boundaries, whether it's in relationships, with our children. We have to have boundaries with our children as well. And in our communities and within our circles. So perhaps Sister Jackie, you can go first. What is some advice that you would, I know you gave one, but what has worked for you since you converted, inshallah?
So just circling back, I think that Dr. Ray kind of was alluding to this, that it's easier to implement boundaries when we have understanding, right? And so specifically when it comes to the convert community, in relationships or in general, but the convert community and the non-convert community, that's one of the issues that we need to work on, is building that understanding. And I know it's not about relationships, but it just made me think of like my first and second ICNA conventions. And there's the convert stories, which is great. Everyone wants to hear it. It's super well attended. But immediately I think, well, is this all we have to offer? Where's the rest of the converts in the conference, right?
We've evolved, Sister Jackie. We have evolved. We're on the main stage and we have evolved.
Exactly. And so I think it's really important to get us all together in a room to, better understand one another and what everyone has to offer, right? Everyone has something to offer. And in that sense, it will be much easier to set boundaries when people have understanding of why things are the way they are. And so I think my advice after this conversation is, in order to set your boundaries, get those tools, but also the tools to build understanding between you and that person that are setting the boundaries. Because without that, I think people don't always follow what you're asking them to do.
Jazakallah khair. Sister Orenda?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that you're not responsible when you do set boundaries, whether it's in your community, your family, your kids, your spouse, whatever it is. Recognize that you're not responsible for that other person's reaction to the boundary that you're setting there with them. You are responsible to communicate your boundaries in a respectful way, of course, because a lot of times we have a hard time doing that. And a lot of the times that's from not being able to set that boundary for a long time, and you become frustrated from that, So like Sister Jackie said, setting those boundaries straight up, or Sister Nahela had mentioned, with those tips, setting those boundaries at the beginning. And, you might run into people who are used to controlling others or manipulating or testing you, and be prepared for it. But know that you have the right to say no and to respect your own boundaries and not to feel guilty for that. I think that's the most important thing. Sometimes we feel like we're being selfish, or we're guilty, we're embarrassed to set those boundaries, but we have to remember that it's a really important part of self-care. And it can affect you later on and cause burnout and anger and resentment if we don't learn to respect our own boundaries and let other people know that.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. So much goodness here. So get to know one another, understanding, set those boundaries. Dr. Ray?
Spend time with people who make you feel good. The people who respect your boundaries, the people who you enjoy spending time with, invest in those relationships, right? And communicate your boundaries to everyone, and understand that people will sometimes test those boundaries, not always because they don't respect you, but because that's just sometimes the nature of people. And to be consistent with the boundaries you set, and to not be shy to be firm, right? The people who respect your boundaries, the people who appreciate your boundaries, you want to give them more of your time. But then also the people who you don't spend a lot of time with, they're going to learn those boundaries a little bit slower. And so to be firm within them and to be consistent with them is important, and to not feel like you're not being righteous, to not feel like you're being disrespectful and all of those things, because you don't know interpersonally what that person's bringing to the table. It might be like from Chappelle's show, right? They said Rick James was a habitual line stepper. He was always stepping over the line, right? That interpersonally, just being a Muslim doesn't mean that you're immune to being a habitual line stepper. There are people who don't know boundaries and also have their own social, like interpersonal struggles too, and they don't know how to relate to people in a way that's healthy. And so sometimes you need to be stern, you need to be firm, and it doesn't mean that you're not being righteous. It doesn't mean you don't love Allah. It doesn't mean you don't love your brother and sister. And for the person who doesn't respect your boundaries, you're also not obligated to spend time with them, right? They're still your brother in Islam. You still want what's good for them. You still do your best to respect them. You still give them salam, but we're not going to be sitting next to each other at iftar. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's okay, right? Not everybody. When you went to high school, you didn't sit at everybody's lunch table either, right? And so this is the same thing in the Muslim community, right? Like, we love each other for the sake of Allah, but we don't chase each other around to try to be best friends with everyone. And it's okay that some people aren't our cup of tea in the community, and to gravitate toward the people who are, and to surround yourself with people who are the kinds of social and religious examples that you're looking for yourself, so that, you know, this journey is about your growth and you getting closer to Allah, and then and you building healthy relationships in the community that, you know, you're coming to know and you're wanting to contribute to. So, you know, inshallah, don't be shy about that.
MashaAllah. I found another little article, mashallah, and I thought this was very interesting, like to notice the red flags, you know, and to make sure that when you notice them, you know, so basically notice the red flags, basically don't drain yourself, don't stress yourself. Once you notice them, you know, like you were saying, pull yourself away, and you don't want to be in those circles, right? So if you know that you don't want to be around someone, you practice your 6 rights, and salam is one of them, and alaikum salam is the next one, and you walk out. The other thing that it says here is like boundaries are not a one-time act. They will need to be repeated. So we need to, some people need repetition, you know, we are habitual, you know, we create habits. And so there's some people that are forgetful, and, you know, you have to be very consistent in order to stay on that course. And like Sister Orenda, you know, said something that we tend to neglect, which is self-care, you know, whatever that looks like for you, and be able to identify that this person is bringing me anxiety. I need to not be around this person, you know, or if I feel like I'm walking on eggshells and I'm not comfortable, then it's time to detach. I always talk about this to my son. We have 3 circles in ourselves, in our home. We have our inner circle that is very tiny, you know, and these are the people that you can call at 2 o'clock in the morning and they will drop and wake up and do anything for you. And then you work out. Your middle circle for me is, you know, your community, people you want to be around with, and then your outer circle that you just owe your 6 rights as a Muslim, right? And Salam is one of them.
Yes.
And you keep walking. So I think that's important to kind of note, and I think there was a lot of great points here. And I mean, this is not a one-time session type of thing. There's just so much to tackle, and it's just this hour went so quick. Any last words any of you want to tell our audience, inshallah?
Well, I think,
Sister Jackie, Sister Orenda, anyone?
well, I was going to say, it's important, like Dr. Ray said, you know, spend the time with the people that you get along with and respect your boundaries. And it's really important to get that support system behind you, because when you can pinpoint people in your life that I would say are toxic, that are making you feel anxiety, that are making you feel bad, that are making you maybe feel guilty, maybe it's not them, and initially look at yourself and how you're viewing that experience, but also to be able to recognize it and lean on the people that are your support, and make sure you get rid of those people in your life that are creating that, you know, that anxiousness in you, because it does make a huge difference.
I have a quick question before we go and go to Sister Jackie. By the way, Imam Wesley says his salams and his love, Dr. Ray.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
He's watching us, so mashallah. Just give us a couple tips, Dr. Ray, because this is hard, right? To set those boundaries is really hard. How can we detach that guilt that we oftentimes feel like, if I say no, I really don't want to go to that house because I don't eat spicy food, or I don't want to eat biryani all Ramadan. How do I say no nicely, even though the right is to accept an invitation? That's the sunnah, right? So that guilt, that initial guilt that we feel, how can we work with that, inshallah?
So I guess a couple of things come to mind. Number one, sometimes present people with an alternative, right? Like, you know, I would rather not do that, but I would like to do this, right? Or I don't mind coming over, but can we have this instead of that? Or can I bring this instead of that? Or, you know, present people with alternatives that kind of meet them in the middle, but then also to focus on what you get. The parallel that I think of is like, I know for myself as a new parent, sometimes I feel guilty when I have to punish my kids, right? And I have to remind myself about the importance of the punishment is to teach them a lesson. There's something to be learned from whatever they did wrong, right? And so it's necessary for me to give them this consequence in order for them to learn to grow, to be responsible. It doesn't feel good in the moment, but it's going to be very valuable for them as far as a life lesson. And so this is the same thing when you're setting boundaries, right? Like, you can suffer people violating your boundaries because it's so uncomfortable for you to set the boundary, but that's a long time of suffering, right? As opposed to dealing with the short term of the discomfort of setting the boundary, but then once it's established, and then the guilt fades away if the guilt lives on until the boundary is established. But then also to remind yourself, I need to be telling this person this thing now so that they come to understand how I prefer to be treated so that we don't go on with me feeling mistreated. And that's very important. And it's so important that I need to be able to tolerate the discomfort that I feel until it starts to go away, right? Or until the boundary is set, and then I don't feel uncomfortable anymore. But there's a lot of kind of necessary difficulties that we have to go through in our interpersonal lives, and they're so important. We oftentimes try to avoid feeling discomfort, and we forget to work towards whatever the goal is, right? When we talk about Jannah, everybody wants to sacrifice during the khutbah, right? When the Imam is talking about Jannah, everybody's like, oh, I need to stay away from this, and I need to stay away from that, and I need to stay away from this and that. And we're willing to make so many sacrifices, right? And to be uncomfortable and to go without and to resist our desires because the goal of what we're looking at is so valuable to us, right? And we need to kind of use that same logical reasoning that whatever you're trying to accomplish interpersonally with somebody is so important that the discomfort that you experience is worth it, because and inshallah to be short-lived. Think about this is what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says about the path to Jannah is paved with hardships and difficulties, right? But we want it so bad that we're willing to be patient and tolerant, right? And the path to Jahannam is paved with ease, right? Because those are the people who take shortcuts and aren't willing to go without and aren't willing to delay their desires, right? Like we just kind of want to do what we want to do, and we're totally avoidant of discomfort, and we only follow the things that are the easiest for us and gratify us. And so we see here, this is, it's akin to that same kind of logic, right? It's worth it to set the boundary, right? And to remember that. And people are okay. I saw a brother yelling at the Imam in the office the other day, and the Imam didn't think nothing of it. He was just like, like that's just how he talks, right? Like, and the Imam, he yells at people too. We learn like, oh, that's just how he talks. We just learn to live with each other, and we're tolerant with each other. We don't take offense. We just kind of accept how we relate to each other, and people can accept you. Don't be afraid to challenge people to accept you, right?
That's beautiful. I
Yes.
think that's what we want to end on.
Yes.
Unless any of you want to say anything else, inshallah. Mashallah, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Ray.
Anyway.
Pleasure. You're becoming a regular here at Embrace.
Yes.
We really appreciate you. And alhamdulillah, we hope to see you again either at another episode here at Reverts Reality or one of our other programs. I want to remind everyone that tonight is the last session for our Hadith Rush. Please join us. After that, we are working towards a Sirah Rush. So we will continue this journey that we began in Ramadan with the Quran Rush. So with that, we want to end, and Jazakallah khair. Thank you everyone for once again joining us on this 24th episode of Reverts Reality. Until next time, thank you ladies. Dr. Ray, Jazakallah khair. Have a great afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.